Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to an unsettling and spine-chilling journey. We're diving into a mysterious tale of hauntings and the supernatural. Hold on to your seats, as the story I'm about to share will grip your imagination and send shivers down your spine. This is not just any story. It's a deeply unsettling account that will leave you questioning the boundary between reality and the supernatural. So, let's begin. In a small, remote village in the northern part of a cold, unnamed country, there lives a man named John. He resides in an old farmhouse with his wife, Mary. It's the winter of 2004, and the cold has already begun to bite with a ferocity that promises an especially harsh season. It all began one frosty afternoon when John's wife, Mary, was preparing lunch. She realized they had run out of potatoes and asked John to fetch some from the cellar. John, always willing to help, grabbed his heavy coat and stepped outside. The moment he opened the door, the cold wind slapped him in the face. It was a biting cold that made his bones ache, but he shrugged it off and headed to the cellar. The cellar was dark, pitch black as John opened the creaky wooden door. He descended the ladder cautiously, his hands gripping the icy rungs. Just as he was about to reach the bottom, he heard a strange hissing sound. He turned around slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes widened in horror as he saw the floor of the cellar writhing with snakes of all colors and sizes, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. John, his heart racing, scrambled up the ladder as fast as he could, not even caring that his coat had slipped off and fallen into the mass of snakes. He burst out of the cellar and ran back to the house, nearly colliding with Mary, who had come out to see what was taking so long. "Snakes! The cellar is full of snakes!" he gasped, his face pale with fear. Mary looked at him incredulously. "Snakes in the middle of winter? Let me see!" She marched to the cellar, peering cautiously inside. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the sea of slithering creatures. She backed away quickly, her face white as a sheet. "They must be looking for a place to hibernate," she said, her voice trembling. John, still shaken, suggested getting rid of them with a shovel, but Mary stopped him. "Snakes are very spiritual creatures. If you harm them, you might anger the spirits," she warned. Mary sent John to fetch some dried sage from old Hank, the village hunter. He returned with the sage, and they set it alight, throwing it into the cellar. Thick, pungent smoke billowed out, and they watched as the snakes slithered away into the cold, seeking refuge elsewhere. Believing the ordeal was over, John cautiously descended back into the cellar to ensure all the snakes were gone. As he explored, he found no trace of the snakes until he reached the corner where the potatoes were stored. There, lurking under a basket, was a large, ominous gray snake. Its eyes locked onto John, and it hissed menacingly. With his heart pounding in his ears, John grabbed a stick and struck the snake repeatedly until it lay motionless. Remembering Mary's words, he hurriedly disposed of the snake's body behind the house, hoping to avoid any ill consequences. That night, they went to bed, hoping to forget the unsettling events of the day. However, the next morning brought a new horror. Mary went to wake John, but found him lying rigid in bed, his body contorted in an unnatural position. Panic-stricken, she ran to the village elder, a wise old man known for his knowledge of the supernatural. The elder entered their home and immediately sensed something was wrong. He saw John and his face grew grave. "This is the work of a vengeful spirit," he declared. "Did you anger any spirits or kill any sacred creatures recently?" Mary recounted the events of the previous day, and the elder nodded knowingly. "The snake you killed was no ordinary snake. It was a manifestation of the spirit known as the Willow Spirit. It was seeking refuge in your home, and by killing it, you have brought its wrath upon you." Mary, terrified and desperate to save her husband, begged the elder for help. The elder instructed her to prepare a sacred offering of grains and incense and set up a shrine to appease the Willow Spirit. He assured her that only by honoring the spirit could they hope to lift the curse. Mary hurried to the village, gathering all the necessary items. With the elder's guidance, she set up the shrine and made the offering. As the incense smoke filled the room, John began to stir, his body slowly returning to normal. Grateful and humbled, John and Mary continued to honor the Willow spirit, ensuring that the shrine was always tended to and offerings made regular. From that day on, they never experienced such a terrifying event again. But the memory of that cold winter's day remained etched in their minds forever. Winter tightened its icy grip on the small village, and the days grew shorter and darker. John and Mary's home, now with its shrine to the Willow spirit, seemed to hold an air of uneasy peace. However, the tranquility was fleeting. One bitterly cold evening, as John was tending to the fire, he heard a faint whispering sound. At first he thought it was the wind, but as the whispering grew louder, he realized it was coming from the direction of the shrine. He slowly approached, his heart thudding in his chest. The whispering became clearer, and it seemed to be calling his name. John, John. He stood frozen, staring at the flickering candles around the shrine. Suddenly, the flames shot up, casting eerie shadows on the walls. John staggered back, feeling a cold, unseen force push him. He stumbled and fell, hitting his head on the edge of a table, and everything went black. Mary found him moments later, unconscious on the floor. She shook him awake, panic flooding her voice. "John, John, wake up!" He groaned, rubbing his head. "I heard something. It was whispering my name." Mary's face grew pale. "The spirit. It's angry." Determined to make things right, Mary visited the elder again, explaining what had happened. The elder frowned deeply. The Willow spirit is restless. It's not enough to simply honor it with offerings. You must find out what it truly desires. That night, Mary and John sat by the fire, discussing their next steps. "Maybe the spirit wants something specific," Mary suggested. "Something we haven't given it yet." John nodded. "But what? How do we find out?" They decided to consult the elder once more. The wise man thought for a long time before speaking. "There is a way to communicate with the spirit, but it's dangerous. You must perform a seance. It will allow the spirit to speak through you, Mary, since it seems more connected to you." Fear gripped Mary's heart, but she knew they had no other choice. They gathered the necessary items, candles, a mirror, and a piece of cloth from the elder's collection, which he said had been blessed to protect them. As midnight approached, they set up the seance in their living room. Mary sat in the center, surrounded by a circle of candles, with John and the elder close by for support. The elder began chanting softly, his voice a low hum that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. Mary closed her eyes, focusing on the elder's chant. She felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, despite the roaring fire. Her breath hitched as she sensed a presence around her. The candles flickered wildly, and the room seemed to darken. Suddenly, Mary's body went rigid, and her eyes snapped open, though they were not her own. A deep, otherworldly voice emerged from her lips. "Why have you disturbed me?" John's heart pounded as he stepped forward. "We seek to make amends. What do you want from us?" The spirit, using Mary's voice, hissed, "You have taken from me. You owe a debt." "What debt? How can we repay it?" John asked, desperate. The spirit's eyes, Mary's eyes, locked onto John's. "You must offer what was taken. Blood for blood, life for life." John recoiled, fear gripping him. "I don't understand." The spirit's voice grew softer, almost sad. "I was close to transcending, to leaving this mortal coil. But your actions bound me here. You must help me move on." John and the elder exchanged glances. The elder stepped forward. "How can we aid your transcendence?" The spirit's gaze shifted to the shrine. A final offering, pure, untainted blood, freely given. John's mind raced. Pure, untainted blood. He understood the implication. It had to be innocent, untainted by sin or malice. After what felt like an eternity, the spirit released Mary, who collapsed, gasping for breath. John held her, fear and uncertainty clouding his mind. How could they find such an offering? And could they really trust the spirit's demands? The elder, sensing their turmoil, offered a solution. There's a ritual we can perform to summon a willing spirit from the other realm. It's risky, but it might be our only chance. John and Mary agreed, though the weight of their decision hung heavy over them. They prepared for the ritual, their hearts laden with dread. The next evening they gathered once more, the elder leading the way. He chanted ancient words, calling forth a spirit of pure intention. The air grew thick with tension as they waited, hoping for a sign. Then, a soft, ethereal light filled the room. A figure emerged, translucent and gentle, radiating warmth. The elder spoke to the spirit, explaining their plight. The spirit nodded, understanding their need. "I will help you," the spirit whispered. "My life ended long ago, and I seek peace. Let me be your offering." Tears filled Mary's eyes as the spirit approached the shrine, merging with the candle's flames. A soft glow enveloped the room, and they felt a deep sense of peace wash over them. The next morning, John and Mary awoke to a bright, clear day. The oppressive weight that had hung over their home was gone. They knew the spirit had found peace, and they were free. They continued to honor the Willow spirit, ensuring the shrine was always well tended. The ordeal had brought them closer together, and they learned to respect the unseen forces that surrounded them. But they would never forget the cold winter's night when they faced the wrath of the Willow spirit and emerged stronger for it. The days grew shorter, and the nights seemed to stretch on forever in the small, isolated village. John and Mary, though relieved by the spirit's departure, couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered. It was as if the very air in their home had thickened, holding an unspoken promise of further unrest. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the snow piled high against their door, John sat by the fire, deep in thought. The flames cast long, flickering shadows on the walls, and the house creaked under the weight of the winter storm. Mary joined him, her face pale and worried. "John," she whispered, "do you feel it too? That presence?" John nodded slowly. "It's like a shadow that we can't see, but we know it's there." Their unease grew, and strange occurrences began happening around the house. Objects would move on their own. Whispers filled the hallways at night, and cold spots appeared in the warmest rooms. The culmination came one night, when they found the shrine's candles extinguished and the offerings disturbed. The village elder had warned them that some spirits, especially those who had been disturbed, could linger, drawn to places of previous unrest. It seemed that the Willow spirit was not the only entity connected to their home. Desperate for answers, John and Mary decided to conduct another seance, hoping to communicate with whatever entity was causing the disturbances. They contacted the elder once more, who reluctantly agreed to help them. As midnight approached, the three of them gathered in the living room. The elder set up the candles and the mirror once more, chanting softly to open the veil between the worlds. Mary, the most sensitive to the supernatural, sat in the center of the circle. The air grew cold, and the candles flickered as an icy breeze swept through the room. The elder's chant grew louder, more urgent, and suddenly Mary's body went rigid again. Her eyes snapped open, but this time they were filled with an intense, almost malevolent light. "Who disturbs me?" came a guttural voice from Mary's lips, a voice not her own. John stepped forward, his voice steady despite his fear. "We seek to understand. Why are you here? What do you want?" The entity in Mary's body snarled. "This place, it is mine. You are intruders." The elder, sensing the danger, interjected. "We mean no harm. We only wish to live in peace. How can we achieve that?" The entity's eyes flashed with anger. "You desecrate my resting place. You must leave or face my wrath." John's heart sank. Leaving their home was not an option. It was all they had. There must be another way. Tell us what we can do. The entity's gaze shifted, considering. There is one way. You must perform a ritual to cleanse this place, to free the spirits trapped here. It is a dangerous task, but it will rid you of me. The elder nodded solemnly. Tell us what we must do. The entity instructed them to gather specific items. A piece of iron, a lock of hair from each of them, and a vial of salt water. These, combined with a sacred chant, would create a powerful cleansing ritual. The entity warned them that during the ritual, the spirits would fight back, and they must be prepared for a struggle. The next day, John and Mary, with the elder's help, collected the items. As night fell, they prepared for the ritual, their hearts heavy with dread. The elder began the chant, and John and Mary added the items to a bowl in the center of the room. The air grew thick with tension as the chant continued. The shadows on the walls seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing. The temperature plummeted, and an unnatural darkness filled the room. Suddenly, a fierce wind erupted, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. John and Mary clung to each other, their fear palpable. The elder's voice rose above the chaos, chanting louder, his words a beacon in the darkness. The spirits, sensing their end, fought back viciously. Objects flew across the room, and ghostly apparitions appeared, their faces twisted in rage. John and Mary held their ground, determined to see the ritual through, as the elder's chant reached its climax. A blinding light filled the room. The spirits screamed in agony, their forms disintegrating into the air. The wind ceased, and the darkness lifted, leaving the room in an eerie silence. Breathless and exhausted, John and Mary looked around. The house was still, the oppressive weight gone. The elder, pale but resolute, nodded. It is done. The spirits are free. Relief washed over them, but the experience had left its mark. They knew their lives would never be the same, but they had gained a new understanding and respect for the supernatural world. In the following months, John and Mary continued to honor the spirits, maintaining the shrine and leaving offerings. Their home, once a place of fear, became a place of peace and reflection. They never forgot the lessons learned during that harsh winter and remained vigilant, knowing the line between the living and the dead was thinner than they had ever imagined. Thank you for staying with me through this harrowing journey. As we close this chapter, remember to respect the unseen forces around us and cherish the peace we have. Until next time, keep your hearts brave and your spirits high.